Peru's informal economy towards Latin America, or what we can call it invisible. So, what is informal economy? So, economy is the way of producing an income or the way of monetary gain in a country or just working in business without any type of government aid, any type of taxable income, or any type of recognition of where you can see that money is going to. And most of the time, it's not even taxable for for the government, or the government doesn't even know how much you're making. So as we continue going through like Peru's way of life, a lot of these informal economies can be placed in a lot of marketplaces and agricultural means. And Peru, being specific, one of the biggest agricultural specific countries in Latin America, is one of those types of economy. And once you go through, you're gonna see a lot of this going on. And how it's easy to understand that you're walking through these places and it's visible to you, but what's really hidden is that a lot of this income is really not towards the country itself but towards people who are going to it, and most of the times it's like almost like many small businesses going on in the country. So here are a few examples that I can show. Like, there's restaurants that are made out of families, food going out to people. There's these huge buildings that are just solamente, or solely for people who want to just have restaurants that they make. And like, I visited Peru last year, and you can see these going on too. They made their own Uber, but there's no app for it, and the only way you pay is in cash or in soles. As you can see, all those motorbikes down there are people who just buy motorcycles and then they add like plastic parts to it to make it into like a cabbie, into making it into like a taxi and like an Uber. It's really funny. You see it everywhere. And most of the time, they also have produce in the back, which is kind of funny. While they're also doing an Uber, they're trying to also sell their produce that they have in the back, as well as like selling ordinary items like water, food. They also use their roofs to collect water pumps, and they actually use their roofs as a business to sell water. So you can see along all these roofs, there's a lot of water tanks, and it's pretty cool how they do that alongside their buildings, where they live, how they're housed, or in their apartments, as well as like historical sites like heading to Machu Picchu or going to Tiki-Taka. They have like a lot of marketplaces that are built under these people's houses or restaurants or stores, where you only pay in cash, no card, nothing like that. And most of these items are sold by hand, by families, by children, all that. As well as like I said before, Machu Picchu, even in these areas where you don't see these markets, at the top you see all these markets going on, made by the people just sitting there selling their items as much as possible, without any type of monetary gain in their aspect of giving it to the government. As well as going to recreational areas, going to play soccer. Here you can see people. This family actually goes out to scrap yards, finds metal, and they make chairs out of them, and then sells them by cash. And keep in mind, most of these people are working to get paid in cash or in soles, with no benefits, no social security income, no taxes. So they're living a life with no taxes at all when the government is taxing them at a 9% average. And then here's another one where people are selling foods or products. This one was in the street of Lima, where they give out like juices and pina coladas on the street. And usually they actually cook a lot of good foods, stuff like that, like like chicharrones. Now, the ups and downs of informal economies, specifically in Peru, is that it's visible, but it's also hidden to many different people. So, for example, a tourist or some regular citizen can walk into Plaza Norte, which is basically a mall which has Adidas, Pumas, all this, where you pay these items to get the items that you want, and most of these items are taxable. You get like an 8% tax, and you don't notice it because it's a card. Everybody just walks through and they get paid their card and all that. But when you start looking around and you start noticing that you're going to some places like these, so like for example, these are mixed with some you know products that you will see in every day, but then you also have products that are also paid in cash. So you'll see pretty soon in this area. So this is a mall which is right next to like a really popular mall. It's called the Pablos Azules, or the Blue Market, where everything right looks like a regular mall. You can find Adidas shoes, you can find Adidas shirts, everything seems normal. You pay with card, you pay with cash, but turns out on the flip side, all this income that they gain is actually not counted for. It goes straight into the pockets of the people who are selling, and all of these are actually hand sewn and made. They're not even from the companies such as Adidas, Pumas, and more. These are actually items that are recreated to look like it, and you can actually find like the most exactly made Nike Jordans and they don't look different, and then when you look closely at it you can tell, oh, there's like a minor difference which makes it not real, which is kind of funny. But it's right there, but it's invisible to the eye to notice that, hey, like, this is not the actual thing, and your cash is not going anywhere, any benefit for the general government economy, which comes to a big issue with the government, especially since they're trying to roll this down. But there's a huge issue with this. And then here's a photo of my cousins eating their little candies. But in the background, you can see how these people made their homes into a market. So you see that door in the middle, that's where my aunt lives. But right next to it is like a market. And right there, this young lady sits right there and sells her shoes and shirts that she made in her home. And she makes a whole auto market out of it. And keep in mind, this is like everywhere. So this is one still photo. Next to it, you're going to see a lot more, which is crazy. So behind all of this, right, the shirts, the markets, the fruits, the soccer balls, seafood, pans, pots, like everything you can think of, right, that you buy from these families, none of this actually affects or improves the government itself and its income. And that's why Peru's situation and being in poverty or no economic assistance from the government comes into a very huge play. So most of the time, a lot of governments and a lot of countries have their system, a way of working with taxable income, where taxes are used for the government to be able to use to sustain the country, to help the country's pavements, all that, just like how the U.S. works. But in Peru, 64% of their workers are informal sectors, which means they work in an informal economy. So most of the money they produce are actually not heading to the government at all, which is ridiculous. It's insane. But a lot of the money, and there's a pros and cons to this, right? People love this way because the money they earn is what they work for. They don't have to pay it to anyone else, while other people in the government or other high standings are paying a lot more in taxes just because they're working in more formal economies. 44% of the country is actually in a formal economy, which means that 44% of the people working in Peru are actually funding the country's GDP or economic prosperity, which is insane to see. And so I wanted to look around and I asked my family, and it's true, they actually pay like up to 20% in taxable income every year because of people working in formal economies, which back then it goes straight back to being the 64%. A lot of more people would rather work in an informal economy. And that's what I'm trying to show the visibility of how important and disadvantaged the government is if a lot of people just switch over to the informal economy. So over the years, informal employment as a percentage of total employment in Peru is starting to decrease, but also level itself at a range where it's gonna stay at 68%, 70%, no matter what over the years. And it's really cool to see how like a lot of people just go back to what they want to work as, is even being an agricultural worker rather than a manufacturer worker. And this plays a huge role in Latin America, especially since Peru's like big agricultural main means in trading with the world or even Latin America is super low, to the point where a lot of people don't want to work in these trading industries. To put it more in context, Peru's Congress only supported with a shared global trade of 4.4% GDP of global trade, which mostly was because of food and potatoes, which is kind of funny to think about. So a lot of these countries that want, especially specifically Peru, that wants to like evolve their communities and their country, don't receive that much income. And over the years, right as of right now, with the new government, they're trying to reduce the informal economies by providing much more payable jobs, better salaries in these formal economies. But there's still that factor of a huge taxable income to these people. Specifically with the US, they only contributed a 0.05% of global trade with the US, and that's the highest that they have. So you can see that in terms of how bad their situation is in global trade with other countries, and specifically since Peru is like a major food trading industry in Latin America, other than its potatoes and seafood, it's a huge deal. Specifically since the Peru government is trying to do something about it, and the informal economy is almost restricted to the point where it could be a huge issue in terms of both the government and the people. If the government wants to reduce a lot of these informal economies, then a lot of these people will be out of jobs or can't have a competition to find jobs in a formal economy industrial way. While in the government aspect, they're going to get a lot more money and income from these people, since a lot of these people are working in these streets, sending and vending their items. And it's incredible how you can see how it's visible to see. You see them everywhere, but you never realize how impactful this can be to the government, but also how impactful it could be for them to actually gain some type of money every day or per year, engrossing up to how much, at least 30 to 50,000 a year. So the money issue there in Peru is a very standstill. It's a very political issue that's going on, and it's a huge issue that a lot of people don't take awareness when they're buying stuff from the market. It's cheaper, and sometimes a tourists are sometimes scammed because it's times two the amount. I got scammed, but it's money, and they'll do their best to get that much money. And in terms of the government not being able to touch that or even finding that process is incredible. Just last year, Peru informal economy made $296 billion in GDP, and none of that went to the government. That was all just engrossed by families and people. And what's insane too about it is that that money could be used a lot to help the poverty situation that's going on, and it's ridiculous to see how the informal economists there are trying to keep it and those are not. So it's like a conflict that's going on, and but it's invisible to the naked eye. Like you can't tell about this. There's no campaigns going on about it. It's almost like a secret hidden world that you don't notice. But this is the main reason why Peru is still in a poverty issue. And a lot of these, like I said, are, they make their own companies and they make all their own businesses just as a side hustle, but when it's really in their job. And like for example, this band of kids made a band to go to parties to play music, um, and we pay them in cash and all that, and they don't have to tax it around, or they don't have to give it to the government or anything. They don't even have to file taxes because it's almost like in Uber. They don't have to pay for that. And with that, there's no government aid. So a lot of people even complain about government aid when they're not even supporting the government, which is kind of interesting as well. And a lot of tourist areas are where the most, like, that's where the formal economies come from, because that's where the taxable income comes from, because the government is trying to tax more tourism sites such as petting llamas or having people get paid by the government just to dress up and do these, which is kind of interesting. You can also see here, like in the right side, when I went to visit, these markets were actually starting to become more funded by the government, and you would actually see government workers walking in and providing some sort of income for them. You can see in the background, if you look closely, it says accept Visa. So they're trying to provide more credit card options so then they can actually tax them and have a way to tax markets and systems going on there in Peru now, which is kind of saddening, but it's also like they need that income to prosper and get rid of the poverty going on in Peru. So that's how we make Peru's visible economy. Um, it's quite interesting to see that you see it everywhere, but you never put to realize that it's like actually invisible, and it's kind of detrimental to the country, in both ways, being good and bad. But is there a safe spot to stay in? But it's higher than a formal economy. And so I leave you with the photo of my cousins eating their little candies behind some marketplaces in my parents' hometown. Yeah.